Raphael Orsini did not drink. Raphael Orsini did not lose control. And Raphael Orsini absolutely never came down to the staff quarters in the East Wing at 2 a.m. to knock on a housemaid's door. In 2 years of working in that house, Marin Doyle had never once seen a crack in the man, never a crooked tie, never a raised voice, never an answer that came half a second late. People called him the chairman of a freight company in Chicago. Marin called him the man with 4 phones who never slept. Every single morning, a dozen men stood waiting outside his study, waiting for him to tell them what to do. She was 27, cleaning that house to support a 12-year-old brother, and she had survived 2 years there by following exactly one rule. Don't ask. Don't ask why there are meetings at 4 a.m. Don't ask why the last room down the basement hallway is always locked. Don't ask why a housekeeper's wages in that house were double what anyone else in the city paid. But on that rainy night, when the pounding pulled her out of sleep and she looked through the gap in the door, the man in the hallway was no longer her employer. His coat was soaked through. His hair was a mess. He was leaning against the doorframe as though he needed it to stay upright. And when he finally spoke, he gave no order, no explanation, no apology. He said only 4 words. "I can't do it anymore." Marin asked him what he couldn't do anymore. And the answer that came from the most powerful man she had ever met tore down everything she thought she understood about the last 2 years of her life. If this story reached you, leave a like so we know we're on the right track. Share it with someone you think needs to hear it too, because a story that arrives at the right moment can be worth more than any advice. And subscribe to the channel, so each week you can join us for another story about ordinary people choosing to be decent in circumstances that are anything but ordinary. Marin didn't have time to think. She caught hold of his sleeve and pulled hard, drawing him inside before closing the door as softly as she could, so softly that she could hear the latch slip into place. The servants' quarters held 7 rooms, and 6 other people were asleep behind doors less than 10 paces away. She led him down the narrow corridor toward the secondary kitchen at the far end of the East Wing, the only place in the house no one entered after midnight, and switched on a single small light above the sink. Raphael Orsini stood in the middle of that kitchen, the man whose name made all of Chicago lower its voice, water still dripping from his hair onto the tiled floor, and he looked around as though he were seeing the room for the first time in his life. "Please sit down, sir," Marin said. He didn't sit. He braced one hand against the edge of the table, and when he spoke, his voice no longer carried the precise, measured rhythm she had heard for the past 2 years. "You asked me what I couldn't bear anymore." Marin didn't answer. She stood an arm's length away, both hands still clutching the front of her nightgown, and waited. "Being that man," he said. "This whole city needs me to be that man. This entire house needs me to be that man. Every morning, 12 men stand outside my office door. They've been there since 7 o'clock, waiting for me to tell them what to do. Not one of them asks whether I slept. Not one of them asks whether I want to do any of it. They just wait." He stopped, and the hand gripping the table tightened. "Only you. In 2 years, you haven't asked me for a single thing. You haven't asked for a raise. You haven't asked for time off. You haven't asked me to step in and fix something for you. You're the only person in this house who doesn't need me." Then he lifted his head, and the look in his eyes made Marin want to take a step back. "Let me stay down here for just one night. I need you." A silence settled over the kitchen, so long that Marin could hear water dripping from the faucet, and in that silence, her heart didn't stir even slightly in the way it should have. Her mind went straight to calculation, cold and orderly, the kind of calculation she had spent 7 years practicing until it came more naturally than breathing. If anyone found out what had happened tonight, she would lose her job. Losing her job meant losing her insurance. Losing her insurance meant Micah would lose his place in treatment, and she would have to return to the waiting list it had taken her 11 months to escape. She was 27 years old, and the most powerful man she had ever met had just told her that he needed her while she was trying to work out where next month's money would come from. She didn't dare feel happy. She only dared to calculate. "How much have you had to drink, sir?" she asked. He laughed, a weary sound with no joy in it. "Enough to say what I haven't said for 2 years. Then you'll regret it tomorrow." "I won't regret it." "You will," Marin said, and for the first time in 2 years, her voice wasn't the voice of an employee. "Tomorrow morning, you'll wake up and remember what you said and who you said it to, and you'll regret it. Then you won't know how to look at me anymore. And one morning, you'll ask me to come upstairs and see you, and you'll say some very kind things, and then I'll have to find another job." Raphael looked at her for a long time. You think too far ahead. I have to, she replied. There's no one else to think ahead for me. She poured him a glass of water, and he took it without drinking. She reached out to support his elbow, and for the first time in 2 years, as she touched this man, she realized he was heavier than she had imagined, and that he was leaning nearly all of his weight against her arm without even knowing it. She led him into the adjoining reading room, lowered him onto the couch against the wall, removed his wet shoes, and went to fetch a blanket. By the time she returned, his head had fallen back against the cushion, his eyes were closed, and his breathing had already begun to slow. She covered him with the blanket, set the glass of water on the floor within reach, and was about to stand when he spoke, very softly, his voice slipping between 2 breaths, like the words of a man talking in his sleep. 107 nights now. Marin went still. She bent closer, but he didn't say anything else. 107. She didn't understand what the number meant. And for one brief second, she almost asked, but she didn't. She never asked questions. In this house, questions were a luxury people paid for with their jobs, and she had a boy of 12 waiting for her to bring lemon cookies on Sunday. She switched off the reading room light, closed the door, and stood in the hallway for a little while before returning to her room. The rain was still falling. She lay down, but she didn't sleep. By morning, she would have to decide whether tonight had happened or whether it had never happened at all. And a woman who hadn't made a single mistake in 2 years was about to make her first wrong choice. At 6:40 in the morning, Raphael Orsini woke with his neck rigid and a dull ache running along his temple. He didn't recognize the ceiling above him. It took him a moment to understand that he was lying on the couch in the reading room in the east wing, on the servants' floor, a place he had entered no more than 3 times in the 8 years he had owned this house. Then the memories returned, not in a single stream, but in broken pieces, each one striking harder than the last. The rain, the door, the young woman's face staring at him through the narrow opening with the alarm of someone who believed disaster had come, the secondary kitchen beneath the light of a single small lamp, and his own voice, sounding completely unfamiliar, saying the thing he hadn't said to anyone in 8 years. Raphael sat up sharply, which was a mistake, and his head protested violently. He covered his face with one hand. Then he saw the small table beside the couch. On it sat a pot of coffee that was still steaming, 2 pills placed neatly beside a full glass of water, his shoes dried and lined up perfectly beneath the table, and a piece of paper folded in half. He picked up the note with fingers that weren't entirely steady. The handwriting was small and even, written quickly but not carelessly. I cleaned the wine from the floor. No one knows you came down here. If you want me to leave, please give me 2 weeks. Raphael read it a second time, then a third. There wasn't a single word of reproach in those 3 sentences. There wasn't a single word of hope either. There was no, "Are you all right?" No, "What did you mean by what you said last night?" Not the smallest sign that she had heard his words and carried them into her heart. She had simply reported that the work was finished, then asked in advance for notice before losing her job. She had cleaned away the night before exactly as she would clean a wine stain from a tiled floor, thoroughly, neatly, without leaving a trace, and now she was waiting for him to decide whether she should be removed as well. Raphael sat there for a long time with the note in his hand. He thought about how, for 2 years, he had paid that woman twice the usual wage, and not once had she asked why. He thought about how the night before, he had told her she was the only person in the house who didn't need him, and now, on this piece of paper, she had proven it with a precision so exact, it felt cruel. She didn't need him. She only needed the job. The reading room door opened without a knock. Sabine Orsini stood in the doorway, one hand still holding her telephone, and she remained there long enough to take in everything in the room. Her brother, 34 years old, chairman of Orsini Freight, was sitting on a couch in the servants' wing wearing yesterday's clothes, his shirt wrinkled, his tie gone, his feet bare. "You didn't go back to your room last night," Sabine said. "It wasn't a question. I had something to do. I called you twice at 4 o'clock this morning. I know. You didn't answer. In 8 years, you've never failed to answer your telephone." Sabine stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "Where did you go?" Raphael didn't answer. He reached for the glass of water and swallowed the 2 pills, and while he did, Sabine watched him with the careful attention of someone who had lived beside her brother long enough to read even the things he didn't say. She looked at the pot of coffee, still hot, and understood that someone had made it less than half an hour ago. She looked at the shoes, dried and placed neatly in a straight line. She looked at the piece of paper in her brother's hand, and she didn't ask what it was. Are you going to tell me? No. Is something wrong? Nothing is wrong. And that was when Sabine noticed the thing that made her fall silent. Her brother was smiling. It wasn't the polite smile he used in meetings, nor was it the weary twist of the mouth she had grown accustomed to seeing. It was a very small smile, almost impossible to notice, resting at the corner of his mouth and in his eyes, the kind of smile Sabine hadn't seen on her brother's face since the winter of 2018. She stood there for a few more seconds. Then she decided not to ask another question. The people from the port will be waiting for you at 9 o'clock, she said. You should take a shower. I know. Sabine left the room and closed the door behind her. Alone again, Raphael looked at the note one more time. He could throw it away. He could let her leave after 2 weeks' notice, give her an additional 3 months' salary, and afterward they could both continue living as though that rainy night had never happened. That was the reasonable thing to do. That was what a man in his position was supposed to do. Raphael folded the note into quarters and slipped it into his breast pocket, and for the first time in 8 years, Raphael Orsini made a decision, without remembering to tap twice against the ring on his little finger. Every Sunday, Maren went to see Micah, and in 7 years she hadn't missed a single one. She caught the bus at 10 o'clock, changed routes once, then walked another 4 blocks with a cloth bag slung across her shoulder. Micah was already waiting at the table beside the window, the chessboard set up in front of him, and the first thing the boy said when he saw his sister wasn't hello. You're 4 minutes late. The bus. You always blame the bus. It really was the bus. Sit down. I'm playing white. The first game lasted 18 moves. Micah was 12 years old, thin as a rail, with his hair sticking up on one side from lying on it, and he played chess with the solemn expression of an old man considering a business deal. He took Maren's queen on the 14th move, then leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and watched her struggle through 4 more moves before finally surrendering. You brought your queen out too early, he said. You always bring your queen out too early. You're impatient. I'm not impatient. You're impatient about everything. In the second game, Maren tried to slow herself down and lost on the 23rd move. In the third, she lost faster than she had in the first 2 games combined, and Micah had to make a serious effort to keep a straight face. 3 out of 3, he said. I think you should find another game. I let you win. No, you didn't. You really lost. You really lost 3 times in a row, and now you're lying. Maren laughed, and it was the first real laugh she had given in 3 days. Micah studied her for a moment, then jerked his chin toward the low bun at the nape of her neck. You're wearing your old lady hair again. This is tidy hair. This is old lady hair. You're 27, and you wear your hair like Mrs. Kowalski in the room next door. She's 81. Mrs. Kowalski is a respectable woman. She's 81 years old, Maren. He shook his head with exaggerated disappointment and began setting the pieces back in place. Another game? I've already lost 3, then lose a 4th. The 4th game stopped on the 9th move because the 2 of them began arguing. Maren castled. Micah objected. Maren said she was allowed to. Micah said that rook had already moved and she couldn't castle anymore. Maren insisted the rook hadn't moved at all, and Micah pulled out a chess rulebook with its cover curled at every corner and opened it directly to a page he had marked in advance. It turned out the boy was right. You marked this page last week, Maren said. Yes, you knew I was going to castle incorrectly. I knew you always castle incorrectly. A doctor stopped by in the middle of it, looked at the chart hanging at the head of the bed, nodded to Maren, and said that everything was progressing well before continuing on to another room. Micah waited until the doctor was out of sight, before returning to the far more important matter. Next Sunday, bring lemon cookies. I'll see. There's no seeing. Promise me. Micah. Pinky. He held his little finger out across the chessboard and kept it there, completely unmoving, until Maren sighed, hooked her own little finger around his, and shook it 3 times. I promise. Lemon cookies, the kind with grated lemon peel on top, not the other kind. I know which kind you mean. I'm only reminding you. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Maren stood up to leave. Micah never said goodbye. He only said, next Sunday, as though it were a certainty rather than an appointment, and Maren was always grateful for that. On the bus ride home, she sat beside the window and did what she always did every Sunday on this exact route. She calculated. 7 years earlier, she had left nursing school during her second year, and for the past 7 years she had been earning back every credit, one by one, at a community college, taking evening classes and weekend classes, 1 or 2 courses each semester, paying out of her own pocket, taking no loans, asking no one for help. She had enough credits. She had completed every theory course. The only thing she still lacked was a clinical placement lasting 12 weeks in a hospital. And she had gone over the list of facilities accepting students in the city so many times that she knew it by heart. Every one of them scheduled daytime shifts, from 7 o'clock in the morning until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Monday through Friday, for 12 consecutive weeks. And during the day, from 7 o'clock in the morning until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Monday through Friday, Marin Doyle was at the Orsini mansion. She had considered leaving her job for 12 weeks and then asking to return, and she had abandoned the idea on the very evening it occurred to her, because 12 weeks without pay meant 12 weeks without insurance. She had considered asking to move to the night shift, but there was no night shift for cleaning staff in that house. For 7 years, her problem had never been money. She had earned the money. She had earned every dollar of it, slowly and stubbornly, and she had come so close. The only thing standing between her and an entirely different life was time. And time was the one thing in the world she couldn't earn by taking on more work. The bus stopped at the corner of her street a little before 6 o'clock. At 6 o'clock the following evening, the man in that house would offer her the exact thing she was missing, and that was when everything began to become dangerous. At 6 o'clock on Monday evening, Freddie Kovash came into the kitchen and told Marin that the master wanted to see her in the library. She said it in the same calm voice she used to announce dinner, but she didn't look Marin directly in the eye, and Marin understood that a woman who had spent 31 years in this house knew far more than she was willing to say. Marin removed her apron and hung it on its hook, then changed her mind and put it back on. She went up to the library wearing the apron. Raphael was standing beside the window when she entered, and he had become himself again. His white shirt didn't have a single wrinkle. His tie was straight, his hair neatly combed, everything arranged down to the last millimeter, exactly as she had seen it every morning for the past 2 years. Only his eyes were different. Those eyes had looked at her the night before in the secondary kitchen, and now they still remembered it. "Sit down," he said. "I can stand." "Marin." She sat in the chair across from his desk, her back straight, both hands resting in her lap. "I'm not going to mention last night again," Raphael said. "If you want to treat it as though it never happened, then it never happened. I called you up here for something else." "Yes, sir." "I want to move you into the position of head housekeeper." Marin said nothing. "You'll manage the entire household staff, the schedules, the ordering, and the supervision. You won't have to clean anymore. And most importantly, the hours. That position doesn't require you to be here at fixed times. You may arrange the work however you choose, as long as everything runs properly." He paused for a moment. "Which means you can be away from 7 o'clock in the morning until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Monday through Friday, for 12 weeks. A long silence settled over the library. Marin sat perfectly still. "You know about my clinical placement," she said. "I do." "How?" "That isn't important." "It is to me." Raphael didn't answer. He only pushed a printed sheet toward her, a list of 4 hospitals in the city that accepted nursing students for the spring placement. And Marin had known all 4 names by heart for a long time. "You may choose whichever one you want," he said. "I won't interfere with whether they accept you. You'll submit the application yourself, interview on your own, and do the work yourself. I'm only making room for it in your schedule, nothing more." He didn't say a single word about money. No tuition, no fees, no envelope, not one offer that could make her feel as though she were accepting charity. Marin understood that he had considered that very carefully, and it was the care he had taken that frightened her most. She looked at the paper on the desk for a long time. Then she pushed it back toward him. "I won't accept it." Raphael looked up. "Why?" "Because you're offering it to me today." She spoke slowly, one word at a time, without taking her eyes from his. "If you'd offered me this 6 months ago, I would have dropped to my knees and thanked you. But you're offering it to me today, after last night. And from the moment I accept it, I won't be an employee in this house anymore. I'll become someone who owes you. Every time you look at me, you'll remember what you gave me. Every time I look at you, I'll remember what I owe you. And one day, when I want to tell you no about something, I won't be able to say it." She stood. I clean your floors. Don't turn me into someone you pity. Raphael didn't stop her. He asked only one question, and it made her halt in the middle of the room. Why did you leave school? Marin stood with her back to him. You already knew I left school. You know about the clinical placement too. I'm sure you already know why. I know the dates. I don't know the reason. She turned around. Because there was a 5-year-old boy who needed someone to sign the papers. There was no one else left to sign them. Raphael Orsini remained silent for a long time after that. He sat down, and for a while he didn't look at her, only at the surface of the desk in front of him. Then he opened the bottom drawer on the left, took something out, and placed it on the desk. It was a stethoscope, old, its rubber tubing faded where it bent, the metal dulled from years without anyone polishing it. I was in my 2nd year of medical school, he said. I received a telephone call in the middle of a lecture, and I never went back to that classroom. Marin looked at the stethoscope lying on the dark wooden desk. In 2 years, she had cleaned this room more than 200 times, and she had never known what was inside that drawer. When? She asked. The winter of 2018. Marin went still. Half a second, no more. A pause so slight that even she wasn't certain she had let him see it. The winter of 2018 was the winter her father died. She said nothing. She didn't ask another question. She only nodded, a very small nod, then thanked him for considering it, and asked permission to go downstairs. Raphael didn't take back the sheet of paper. He left it where it was on the desk. That night, at 2 o'clock in the morning, Marin went down to the kitchen and found the light already on. Marin went down to the secondary kitchen at 2 o'clock in the morning, with a stack of books tucked beneath her arm, just as she did every night, and she stopped in the doorway because the light was already on. Raphael Orsini was sitting at the kitchen table, his shirt open at the collar without a tie, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, with a glass of water in front of him, and nothing else. He didn't stand. He didn't explain why he was there, didn't mention what had happened in the library that afternoon, and didn't ask whether his presence bothered her. He simply reached out and pushed the chair across from him away from the table. Read. I'll sit here. Marin remained where she was for several more seconds. Then she stepped inside, set down the stack of books, pulled out the chair, and sat. She opened the book on top to the page marked with a paper clip, took a pencil from her pocket, and began to read. 40 minutes passed, and the man sitting across from her didn't say a single word. He didn't look at his telephone. He didn't get up and pace. He didn't ask what she was studying, didn't ask how much longer she had left, and didn't try to begin a conversation. He only sat there with both hands resting on the table, and whenever Marin glanced up, she found him staring into the darkness beyond the window, with the expression of a man who had finally found a place where no one needed anything from him. She had thought she wouldn't be able to concentrate. She had thought his presence would make her read the same line 3 times without understanding a word. But after about 15 minutes, she forgot he was sitting there, and that was the strangest thing about the entire night. Near 3 o'clock in the morning, Marin set down her pencil and looked up. Raphael was watching her. "Why don't you go back to bed?" she asked. "Because this is the only place in this house where no one is waiting for me to say something." She meant to say something in return, but she didn't. Raphael stood and came around the table, moving slowly enough that she had more than enough time to stand and leave if she wanted to. She didn't stand. He leaned down and kissed her. The kiss was brief and warm, and there wasn't the slightest trace of haste in it. When he drew back, neither of them spoke. Then a telephone rang. It wasn't the telephone he always carried in his breast pocket. It was another one, smaller and older, which he took from his left trouser pocket, and Marin had never seen it in 2 years. Raphael looked at the screen, then stepped 3 paces away from the table. During the next 40 seconds, Marin heard the voice of the man who had just kissed her drop by 3 tones. "Speak." A pause. "Warehouse 7. Another pause. "No. That shipment isn't staying there past tomorrow night." His voice didn't rise. That was what made it frightening. It merely grew shorter and flatter, stripped of everything that might be called human, and every sentence he spoke was one no one was permitted to question. "Who is on the night shift?" Silence. "Then replace them." Silence. "Handle it before morning." "I don't want to hear about this again." As he listened, the thumb of his right hand tapped twice against the ring on his little finger. 2 very soft, even taps, separated by exactly 1 beat. and Marin realized she had seen that gesture hundreds of times over the past 2 years, without ever truly noticing it. He ended the call, slipped the telephone back into his trouser pocket, and turned around. And once again, he was the man who had just kissed her. "I'm sorry," he said. "It's all right, sir. Work." "Yes." Marin closed the book. She arranged the 3 books into a neat stack, tucked them beneath her arm, and pushed the chair carefully back under the table as she did every night. "It's late." "Good night, sir." "Marin." She stopped at the door. "Will you come down here tomorrow?" "I don't know," she said. Then she walked out into the corridor. She climbed the back stairs, opened the door to her room, and closed it behind her. She placed the stack of books on the table. She took off her shoes. She sat on the edge of the bed. She didn't turn on the light. The following morning, for the first time in 2 years, Marin Doyle went looking for Freddie Kovac to ask a question. At 6 o'clock in the morning, Freddie Kovac was alone in the main kitchen. She was chopping onions on a wooden cutting board, her movements steady with the practiced rhythm of someone who had done the same work for 31 years, and she didn't look up when she heard Marin walk in. "You're up early." "I didn't sleep." Marin stood at one end of the kitchen island for a while. Then she asked, "Freddie, what is Warehouse 7? The knife stopped in the middle of its stroke. Freddie Kovac set it down on the cutting board, wiped both hands on her apron, and looked at Marin for a long time before speaking. It was the look of someone deciding whether she should answer, and by the time she had made her decision, it was already too late not to. "Child," she said, "I've cooked for this family for 31 years. The fact that you're asking me that means you've already answered it for yourself. Your real question isn't who they are. Your real question is why, for 2 years, you chose not to see." Marin couldn't answer. Freddie pulled a chair out from beneath the island, sat down, and told her to sit. Then she began to tell her. She spoke without lowering her voice, without glancing toward the door to see whether anyone was there, and without adding a single word to make the story sound more terrible than it was. She told it the way a person might describe the weather from the winter before. She said Raphael's grandfather had come here in 1963 and started with 3 trucks that delivered blocks of ice to restaurants in Bridgeport. She said that by the time Raphael's father took over, the family owned 17 warehouses along the riverfront, and that along with those 17 warehouses came other things people didn't put down on paper. She said there were families on the south side who, for 3 generations, had referred to the Orsinis simply as the Orsinis, with no other word needed, and everyone understood exactly what that name meant. She said Raphael's father had been shot to death on his way home one evening in December, and that Raphael had been sitting in a medical school lecture hall when it happened. He was 26, Freddie said. 3 days after the funeral, more than a dozen men were waiting for him outside the door to his father's office. He walked into that room, and he never walked back out. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "I understand." "No, you don't. Not yet." Freddie picked up the knife, then set it down again. "That room at the end of the basement corridor you walk past every day. You've never once asked what was inside it. Cars come into the courtyard at 4 o'clock in the morning, and you've never looked out the window. Your wages are twice what you'd earn anywhere else in this city, and you've never stopped to calculate why. Child, you aren't blind. You're someone who covered her own eyes, and you covered them because you have a 12-year-old boy who needs you to keep this job." Marin sat perfectly still. "I don't blame you," Freddie said, her voice softening. "I've done exactly the same thing for 31 years. I only want you to understand that from this morning forward, you aren't allowed to pretend anymore. That's the price of asking." She picked up the knife and resumed chopping the onions, and the conversation ended there. Marin worked that entire day exactly as she did every other day. She cleaned the second-floor corridor. She replaced the towels in 6 bathrooms. She passed the door at the end of the basement hallway twice, and both times she kept her eyes forward. At 8 o'clock that evening, she did what she had done every Tuesday and Friday for the past 6 months. She went up to the 3rd floor, walked the length of the west corridor, and knocked 3 times on the final door. "Come in." Nonna Rosalba sat in an armchair beside the window, with an Italian book lying face down across her lap. She was 82 years old, her back still straight, and she looked at Marin with the expression of someone who had been waiting for precisely the person who had arrived. "You're 10 minutes late." "I'm sorry. I'm not going anywhere." "What's the hurry?" Marin pulled out the low stool, set down her bag, washed her hands in the small basin in the corner, then knelt in front of the old woman. She worked in silence, practiced and sure, never asking whether Nana was in pain because she knew the woman would never answer that question honestly. Nana Rosalba looked down at the crown of her head. "Your hands are cold. It's cold outside." "Cold hands," the old woman said, and she spoke the words like a name, rather than an observation. "I've called you that for 6 months, and you've never once argued with me. I wouldn't dare argue with you. You dare plenty. You simply can't be bothered to argue." Marin secured the final bandage, packed her things back into the bag, and stood. "I'll come up on Friday." The old woman opened her book, then added one more sentence when Marin had already reached the door. "Child, everyone in this house knows how to tell other people what to do. You're the only one who knows how to do it." Marin closed the door and stood in the hallway for a while. She didn't sleep that night. At 7 o'clock the next morning, she knocked on the door of the master's office, and this time, she was the one who asked the first question. At 7 o'clock in the morning, Marin knocked on the office door and walked in without waiting for an answer. She was still wearing her work uniform, and the apron was still tied around her waist. She had considered taking it off at the foot of the stairs, and she had decided not to, because she wanted the man sitting behind that desk to see exactly who was standing in his room. Raphael looked up. He had already been sitting there, his coffee untouched, and he looked at the apron before he looked at her face. "Sit down. I have a question for you." "I know." "You know? I heard Freddie's knife stopped in the middle of a stroke yesterday morning," Raphael said. "In 31 years in this house, she has never let her knife stop in the middle of a stroke." Marin placed both hands on the back of the chair in front of her and tightened her grip. "What is the Orsini family? You already know. I want to hear you say it." Raphael set down his coffee cup. He didn't evade the question, didn't offer a carefully prepared explanation, and didn't say a single sentence that began with "but." "Yes," he said. "It's me." The room remained silent for several seconds. "You aren't going to deny it?" "No." "You aren't going to tell me I've misunderstood?" "No." "You aren't going to tell me you're only the chairman of a freight company?" "I am the chairman of a freight company," Raphael said. "And I am the other thing. Both are true. If you want me to say it aloud, then I'll say it aloud. I won't make you spend another day guessing." And that was when Marin became angry. The anger came later than she had expected. It hadn't come in the kitchen at 6 o'clock the morning before. It hadn't come while she cleaned the second-floor corridor. It hadn't come while she lay awake through the night. It came now, when this man admitted everything with perfect calm, and that calm showed her that he had lived with this truth for so long that it no longer hurt him. 2 years, she said. "I slept in this house for 2 years. I ate here. I kept my belongings here. Every morning, I crossed the courtyard at 7 o'clock, and there were cars parked outside that I didn't recognize. 2 years, sir, and not once did you think to tell me what kind of place I was living in. I kept you outside of it to protect you." "No," Marin shook her head. "You kept me outside of it because you didn't want me to leave." Raphael didn't answer. "I'm 27 years old," she said. "I have a 12-year-old boy in this world, and on every piece of paper, the only name signed is mine. There is no one else. No uncle, no aunt, no grandparents. If I don't come home tomorrow, the only name left in his file will belong to someone who is dead. Do you understand what that means? It means every time I walk through a door, I need to know exactly what I'm walking into. That is my right. It is the only thing I have, and you took it away from me for 2 years. No one can touch you." Raphael said it in the voice of a man stating a fact, not making a promise. "Not in this house. No one." "You don't understand." Marin released the back of the chair. "I'm not afraid. I'm angry, because you made the choice for me." She turned toward the door. "Marin," she didn't stop. "There is something else. About your father." She had already reached the doorway. Her hand was on the knob, and she had pulled the door halfway open. She heard the words clearly, and she didn't turn around. She went straight down the back stairs, returned to her room, and began packing. She owned fewer things than she had imagined. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, she handed the house manager a handwritten letter of resignation, effective immediately, and asked for no pay for the unfinished week. Freddie stood in the kitchen doorway and watched her pass without saying a word, only pressing a box of food into her hands and gripping her wrist very tightly. The hardest part came last. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Marin went up to the 3rd floor walked the length of the west corridor, and knocked 3 times. "Come in." "Goodbye, ma'am. I came to tell you that I have to leave for a few days." Nana Rosalba set down her book. "What for?" "Family business. In Springfield." "How long?" "I don't know yet. A few days." The old woman looked at her. She looked for so long that Marin had to lower her eyes to the carpet beneath her feet. "A few days," the old woman repeated. "Yes, ma'am. Then I shouldn't wait for you on Friday. Please call the nurse to come up." I left the telephone number on the table. "I won't call anyone, Mrs. Orsini." "I won't call anyone," the old woman said, and she opened her book and didn't look up again. "Travel safely, cold hands." Marin closed the door very softly. She stood in the corridor for a while, and that was the only time she cried that entire day. 3 days later, someone knocked on the door of the cramped apartment in Rogers Park. It wasn't Raphael. The person standing outside the door was Sabine Orsini. She wore a black coat, held her car keys in one hand, and had brought nothing with her. "May I come in?" The apartment in Rogers Park had 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, and a dining table pushed against the wall that Marin used as a study desk. Sabine sat in one of the 2 chairs and looked around for exactly 3 seconds, no longer. Just enough not to appear contemptuous and not enough to appear pitying. "Don't worry," she said. "I didn't come to persuade you to return. My brother doesn't know I'm here, and if he finds out, he'll be angry with me for 3 weeks. Then why are you here?" "To tell you something. Then I'll leave." Marin didn't sit. She leaned against the edge of the kitchen counter with her arms folded. Sabine began to speak, and she told the story in the manner of someone who had repeated it many times in her own mind, but had never once spoken it aloud. "My father was shot to death one evening in December while he was on his way home, less than a mile from our gates. I was 21 that year. Raphael was 26. He was sitting in a second-year medical school lecture, and his telephone vibrated in his pocket in the middle of class. He stepped into the hallway to answer it. I know because I was the one who called him." Sabine paused for a moment. 3 days after the funeral, 17 men came to the house. They didn't enter through the front door. They stood in the corridor outside my father's office and waited. They weren't waiting to offer condolences. They were waiting to see who would open that door. Marin said nothing. "You have to understand what would have happened if no one had opened it," Sabine said. "In that world, a family without someone at its head is already dead, even if it hasn't fallen yet. Within a month, those 17 men would have divided everything among themselves. Within 3 months, the other families would have come to take their share. And people always begin with the easiest place." She looked directly at Marin. "The easiest place was my grandmother. It was me. It was my cousin's 2 children, who were 4 and 6 at the time. Women and children in a family with no one left to protect them, you understand. That isn't a theory. It happened to the Del Vecchio family in 1994, and this entire city knows it. So he opened the door." "He opened the door," Sabine said. "My brother was 26 years old and training to become a doctor, and he walked into that room and never walked out again. 8 years. I've never once heard him complain. I've also never once heard him say he likes what he does." Sabine stood. "I didn't come here to tell you he's a good man. He does things I won't tell you about, and you have every right not to want any part of them. I only want you to know one thing." She picked up her keys. "My brother has loved only once in his life. If you leave, he'll survive. He'll still wake at 6 o'clock, still make decisions, still carry the weight of this empire every morning. There simply won't be any reason for him to come home anymore." Sabine walked toward the door. She opened it, then stopped with one hand still resting on the knob. "One more thing. The day you left, he was trying to tell you something. You didn't let him finish." Then she left. Marin stood in that small kitchen for a long time after the door had closed. 2 days later, she returned to the mansion. She entered through the servant's door as she always had, went straight to the office, and this time she wasn't wearing an apron. Raphael stood when she entered, and he couldn't say a word. "I have 3 conditions," Marin said. "I'm listening. First, from today on you tell me the truth. All of it. I don't need you to describe every detail of what you do, but if I ask, you answer, and you answer truthfully." "Agreed." "Second, you don't hide anything from me that concerns me. Anything. Even if you think it will hurt me. Even if you think I'm not ready to hear it. Even if you think I'll leave when you tell me. You tell me anyway. Let me decide for myself how much I can bear." Raphael was silent for a moment longer than necessary. Agreed. Third, you teach me. Your world, how it works, who everyone is, what everything means. I don't want to be kept blind anymore. The person who can't see is the easiest person in the room to kill. Raphael Orsini looked at the woman standing before him for a long time. Then he said, I promise. He had just lied, because inside the safe behind him was a file bearing the name Doyle, and he had been keeping it for 2 years. Raphael honored the third condition before he honored either of the first two, and he did it in a way no one in the house had expected. On Wednesday morning, he placed an extra chair in his office at the left corner of his desk and told Marin to sit there. Stay here all morning, he said. You don't have to say anything. Just listen. The 3 weeks that followed were the strangest 3 weeks of the 2 years she had lived in that house. He taught her to read payroll records first, because he said payroll was the one thing that didn't know how to lie. He showed her a warehouse that listed 40 employees, even though only 27 of them ever came to work. And he asked who she thought the other 12 names belonged to. He taught her how to look at a shipping contract and know whether it was clean, not by the language written in it, but by the timing, by where the goods traveled and how long the journey took, by why a truck going north from the riverfront required 6 hours to cover a route that should have taken 40 minutes. He taught her why 12 men waited outside his door every morning. It isn't because they're loyal to me, he said. It's because they don't know what to do unless someone tells them. Half of them worked for my father before I was born. They're old now. They don't know any other trade. And if this house falls, they lose everything. Loyalty and having no way out look very much alike when you see them from a distance. Marin learned quickly, and she asked questions he hadn't expected. She asked why one warehouse needed so much insurance. She asked why 3 different contractors were being paid to do the same work during the same quarter. She asked who approved expenses below $5,000, and when he told her that anything under $5,000 didn't require his signature, she said that in that case, she would steal from him in payments of $4,900, one every week, for 10 years. Raphael laughed, a real laugh, and wrote the remark down on a piece of paper. Sabine walked in at that exact moment. She looked at the chair beside the desk, looked at the two of them, then set down the file in her hands with an expression of perfect seriousness. I'm sorry for interrupting the lesson. Sabine, no, truly. I didn't know we had a tutor in the house now. Do I have to enroll, or may I simply walk in? Go outside. You're laughing, Sabine said, and this time her voice was gentler, no longer teasing. I've seen you laugh more in the past 3 weeks than I did in the previous 8 years combined. Then she left and closed the door behind her, and an awkward silence settled over the room, one they both pretended not to notice. On Friday afternoon of the 3rd week, Marin was reviewing the list of Orsini Freight's subsidiary companies, 19 names spread across 2 pages, when her pencil stopped at the 14th line. What is this? Which one? Lakeshore Meridian Holdings. Raphael glanced over. I don't remember. The other 18 all have the name of the person in charge in the next column. This one is blank. It probably hasn't been updated. It received 3 transfers during the last quarter. I'll ask Gideon. He said it and turned to another page, and neither of them mentioned it again. Near 6 o'clock, while they were gathering the papers, Marin suddenly said something that seemed to have nothing to do with anything. Mr. Prosser's wastebasket has been empty for the past 3 days. What? There hasn't been anything in it. 3 days in a row. She shrugged. People only stop throwing things away when they start taking everything home. Raphael laughed. You really are a cleaner. For 2 years, sir. Enough. It's late. And he didn't give the matter another second of thought. The following Monday morning, at precisely 7:15, just as he had every Monday for 12 years, Gideon Prosser knocked and entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. He was 45 years old, impeccably dressed, and moved with the quiet step of a man accustomed to working in silent rooms. He wore a pleasant smile that everyone in the house knew well. Good morning, sir. The coffee is a little stronger today. I changed the blend. Then he saw the chair at the left corner of the desk. He saw the woman sitting there with the list of subsidiary companies open across her lap and a pencil resting between 2 fingers. His smile faltered. Half a second. No more. Then it returned, complete and flawless, exactly as it had been before. Good morning, Miss Doyle. Good morning, Mr. Prosser. He set the coffee on the desk, reported 3 matters, received 2 instructions, and left. When he reached the basement, Gideon Prosser closed the accounting room door and sat in the darkness for a very long time. He wasn't afraid of losing his employer to a woman. He was afraid of something else. The cleaner had keys to every room in that house, including the rooms he had kept locked for 12 years. On Tuesday, Marin reached Rogers Park at 7 o'clock in the evening and saw the car. A black sedan was parked across the street, about 20 meters diagonally from the entrance to her apartment building, with dark tinted windows and no one inside that she could see. She walked past it, climbed the stairs, unlocked her apartment, and removed her shoes, then stopped in the middle of the room because she had just remembered where she had seen that car before. That morning, in the rear courtyard of the Orsini mansion, parked beside the row of old storage buildings. When she had gone outside to empty the dirty floor water, Marin went to the window and looked down. The car was still there. She closed the curtains and told herself there were thousands of black sedans in this city, that she was tired, that over the past 3 weeks she had heard far too many things a cleaner was never meant to hear, and now she was beginning to see danger everywhere. She went to bed. On Wednesday morning, the car was gone, and she felt an enormous sense of relief, followed by a little shame for having been so suspicious. On Thursday, at 6 o'clock in the evening, she came home and found a white envelope lying on the floor just inside the door. No stamp, no address, no name. Someone had slipped it through the gap beneath the door. There was only one thing inside: a photograph. The woman in the picture was Marin herself. She was standing on a folding ladder in the second-floor corridor of the Orsini mansion, holding a cloth in her right hand, her body leaning slightly toward the third window, her hair tied low at the nape of her neck. She was wearing her work uniform and apron. The photograph had been taken from the courtyard below, looking upward through the very window she was cleaning. Marin stared at the picture for a long time, and she didn't understand why her hands had begun to tremble. Then she understood. Whoever had taken the photograph had been standing inside the rear courtyard of the mansion. Not on the street. Not beyond the fence. Inside the courtyard, less than 30 meters from where she stood, in the middle of the day, and not one of the 12 men who waited outside the office door every morning had seen him. She turned the photograph over. On the back was a single sentence in black ink, printed in square, deliberate letters designed to reveal nothing about the person who had written them. "He can't protect you." Marin didn't scream. She didn't drop the photograph. She simply lowered herself to the floor, rested her back against the door, and sat there without moving for a length of time she would later be unable to remember. It wasn't the sentence that frightened her. She had read enough to understand that genuine threats were rarely written down. It was the photograph. For 2 years, the Orsini mansion had been the only place in the world where she believed nothing could happen to her. There were walls, gates, guards, 12 men, 4 telephones, and 1 man who never slept. And someone had stood inside that courtyard, raised a camera, photographed her while she cleaned a window, and walked away as easily as if he were leaving a public park. She called Freddie. The older woman arrived 40 minutes later, still wearing her kitchen apron beneath her coat, and she didn't ask a single question. She picked up the photograph, turned it over, read the message, then placed it face down on the table. After that, she did something Marin hadn't expected. She sat on the floor beside her, leaned against the same door, and drew her knees up like a young woman rather than someone 63 years old. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. I know you've been secretly going upstairs to see Nonna Rosalba," Freddie said. "For 6 months, every Tuesday and Friday night, after you've finished your own work. I know everything." Marin turned to look at her. "I also know you haven't taken a single cent from her, and you haven't told anyone a word about it. Not even the master." Freddie let out a slow breath. "Oh, child, you know how to take care of this entire house. So who takes care of you?" Marin couldn't answer that question. On Friday morning, she arrived at the mansion earlier than usual and went directly to the office. Raphael was standing beside his desk with an open file in front of him, and he looked up when she entered. She said nothing. She only placed the ring of mansion keys on the desk between them. He looked at the keys. He understood immediately, and Marin saw the exact moment he understood because something in his face went dark. "Who?" he asked. "I don't know." "Show me." She placed the photograph beside the keys. Raphael stared at it for a long time. He didn't ask whether she was afraid. He didn't promise to find whoever had done it. He didn't say any of the words she had prepared herself to resist. He said only one thing: "You deserve to sleep without listening for an engine outside your window." Then he pushed the keys back toward her, and when she didn't take them, he withdrew his hand. Marin left the room. She didn't look back, walked straight through the gates, and didn't cry until she was safely on the bus. 3 days later, Raphael's telephone vibrated at 4 o'clock in the morning. An unfamiliar number. 4 words. "I know who killed your father." Attached was a photograph of something only a person who had been there that night could still possess. On Saturday morning, there were 3 knocks at the door of the apartment in Rogers Park, slow and firm. Marin opened it, and the person standing in the hallway was Nana Rosalba, 82 years old, a cane in one hand and a cloth bag in the other, her back as straight as ever. At the far end of the hallway, a man from the household stood waiting beside the stairs, and he made no move to come closer. "Mrs. Orsini, how much longer do you intend to leave me standing out here?" Marin stepped back to let her pass. The old woman entered, gave the apartment a single glance, then walked straight to the only chair beside the dining table and sat down. She rested her cane against the edge of the table. The first thing she said wasn't a word of comfort. "No one has changed my bandages for 3 weeks. I had to do it myself. I did a terrible job." Marin stood frozen in the middle of the room. Then she began to cry, the way someone cries after holding it in for far too long, without making a sound, her shoulders trembling, one hand pressed over her mouth. Nana Rosalba didn't comfort her. She simply sat there and waited for it to pass. Marin washed her hands at the kitchen sink, took the cloth bag the old woman had brought, pulled out the low stool, and knelt in front of her. She worked in silence for nearly a minute, her movements memorized, neat and gentle, never asking whether the old woman was in pain. "You really did it yourself?" "I told you. I did a terrible job. You should have called the nurse." "I didn't want anyone in the house to see," the old woman said. "Do you know why I didn't want them to?" "I do." "Yes, you do. That's why I've allowed you into my room for the past 6 months instead of anyone else." The old woman sat quietly for a while, looking down at the crown of the woman kneeling before her. "I was 20 years old when I stepped off the ship in New York. I didn't know a single word of English except thank you. 6 months later, I was married. They gave me to a man whose name made that entire city lower its voice. And on our wedding night, I was too frightened to look him directly in the face." Marin looked up. The old woman was staring out the window. "For the first 3 years, I couldn't sleep. I lay there listening to every sound in the street. If a car stopped, I sat up. If I heard footsteps on the sidewalk, I held my breath. 3 years, child. By the 4th year, I had my first son, and I still lay awake listening, but I listened differently. I wasn't listening to find out whether someone was coming. I was listening to find out whether he had come home." "Weren't you afraid anymore?" "I was afraid until the day he died," Nana Rosalba said. 58 years. There wasn't a single day when I stopped being afraid." Marin lowered her head and continued working. "Then why did you stay?" "That is the question you have to answer for yourself. Not one I can answer for you." The old woman straightened a little. "But I will ask you something, and you must answer honestly, not beautifully. You're afraid, yes. I don't blame you. But if something happened to that boy of yours, would you abandon everything and run to him?" "Yes," Marin answered at once, without thinking, without hesitation. "Your job? My job. The degree you've worked toward for 7 years? That too. Your own life? Yes." Nana Rosalba nodded slowly. "Then why do you believe the love someone feels for you must be less than the love you feel for him?" Marin's hand stopped. "Do you think you're the only person in this world capable of loving that deeply?" The old woman said. "Do you think my boy loves you only a little? Within reason? Only when it's convenient? I don't think that. You do. Everyone who runs away thinks that." Silence filled the room for a while. Marin secured the final bandage, then sat back with both hands resting in her lap. "Mrs. Orsini, I know who he is now. I know you do. Don't you have anything to say to me?" "What should I say?" The old woman shrugged. "My husband was the same. So was his father. My son was shot to death in December of 2018, less than a mile from the gates, and I was the one who had to identify the body." Marin went still. For exactly half a second, she didn't move, and the old woman saw it. "What is it?" "My father died that winter too," Marin said. "In January." Nana Rosalba said nothing. She remained silent for so long that Marin thought she hadn't heard. "Is that so?" she finally said. Then she sat straighter and looked directly into Marin's face. That year took both of your hands from you. It made my boy put down his stethoscope. It made you put down your books. Then 8 years later, it pushed the two of you into the same kitchen at 2 o'clock in the morning. Call that whatever you like. I'm too old to call it a coincidence. Marin couldn't speak. The old woman reached for her cane, planted it against the floor, and stood. I didn't come here to tell you to go back. Whether you return is your decision, and if you don't, I will care for you just the same. But there is one thing I want to say before I leave. She stood there with one hand resting on her cane, and when she spoke, her voice was very soft. For 6 months, you hid it from the entire household, so you could take care of me. You finished your own work before coming upstairs. You never took a cent from me. You never asked anyone for a word of thanks. Child, you know how to care for everyone in this world except yourself. When will you finally allow yourself to need someone? Marin walked her all the way down to the car. The old woman didn't mention any of it again. She only reminded Marin to eat breakfast, then told the driver to leave. Throughout the whole of the following Sunday, Marin couldn't do anything properly. At 6 o'clock on Monday morning, her telephone vibrated. It was Sabine, and her voice broke on the very first word. He is gone. Those were the first 3 words Sabine said, and her voice broke on the third. Gone where? Warehouse 7. 4 o'clock this morning. Alone. Marin sprang up from the edge of the bed. Sabine, slow down. He called me at 4 o'clock this morning. He said he had to meet someone. I asked who, and he wouldn't tell me. I asked who he was taking with him, and he said no one. Then he gave me one instruction, and that was what frightened me. Sabine stopped to breathe. He told me to wait exactly 2 hours before telling anyone. Not a minute sooner. The 2 hours ended at 6 o'clock. It's 6:04 now. Marin was already on her feet, searching for her shoes. Where are you? Home. Where are you? At the mansion. I've called security. They're gathering everyone, but no one knows where to go because Warehouse 7 has 3 entrances and 4,000 square meters of space inside. I called the lawyer too. He asked what evidence I had, and I told him I had nothing. I don't know what else to do. Stay there. I'm coming. Marin reached the mansion at 6:40. More than a dozen men stood in the entrance hall. The same men who waited outside the office every morning, and not one of them moved because no one had told them what to do. Sabine stood in the middle of the hall with her telephone in her hand. Freddie was standing in the kitchen doorway. He isn't answering, Sabine said. I've called 17 times. Marin didn't answer. She walked straight across the hall toward the stairs leading down to the basement. Where are you going? The accounting room. Open it for me. Why? Open it for me, Sabine. Someone found the key. The room stood at the end of the basement corridor. Behind the door Marin had passed every day for 2 years without stopping once. Inside were a desk, 2 filing cabinets, a printer, and no windows. Marin stood in the middle of the room and looked. She looked with the eyes of someone who had cleaned that room 200 times and knew exactly where everything belonged. 3 days before I left, she said, the wastebasket in this room was empty. 3 days in a row. I told him about it, but he laughed. What does that mean? People stop throwing things away for 2 reasons. Either they aren't doing any work, or they're taking everything home. She walked around the desk. Mr. Prosser worked in this room for 12 years. He printed a great deal of paper. He wasn't a man who did nothing. Sabine stepped into the room behind her. Marin stopped at the left corner of the desk and pointed to a rectangular space in the thin layer of dust. There was a picture frame here, a family photograph, his wife and 2 daughters, taken beside some lake. For 2 years, it always stood in this exact place, angled toward his chair, and I cleaned it every Tuesday. Last Friday, it disappeared. She looked up at Sabine. A man who removes his family photograph from his desk is a man who doesn't intend to return. Sabine said nothing. Marin continued toward the filing cabinet and pulled open the second drawer on the left. It opened. It was empty. For 2 years, this drawer was always locked, she said. I clean this cabinet once a week. I know which drawers were locked and which weren't. Silence filled the windowless room for about 5 seconds. Then Sabine understood. Marin saw the exact moment it happened, because the color drained from her face. He didn't go to meet someone, Sabine said. Someone summoned him there. Prosser started taking all the documents home 3 weeks ago. He removed the family photograph from his desk on Friday, and this morning, he left the drawer unlocked because there was nothing left inside, and he had no intention of returning for anything. Marin closed the drawer. He has been preparing this for at least 3 weeks. Sabine had already taken out her telephone. I'm calling the police. If you call the police, they'll arrive an hour from now and ask you 30 questions before they even get out of the car. Marin walked toward the door. Drive me there. Now. Have you lost your mind? What are you going to do when you get there? I don't know, Marin said, and she said it with perfect calm. But I'm the only person in this house who could read that room. And for the past 3 weeks, he taught me how to read payroll records and contracts. It might help, it might not, but I can't sit here. Sabine looked at her for 2 seconds, then turned to get the car keys. Freddie stood at the top of the stairs, and as the 2 women passed her, she said only one thing. I'm coming with you. The 3 of them drove through the gates at 10 minutes to 7. What none of them knew was that the man waiting at Warehouse 7 hadn't brought a gun as his primary weapon. He had brought a file. Raphael Orsini arrived at Warehouse 7 on the South Branch riverfront at 4:20 in the morning, alone. And he knew it was a trap before he stepped out of the car. He had known from the moment he read the message. Someone who truly had information wouldn't send a message at 4 o'clock in the morning, arrange a meeting inside a warehouse belonging to the Orsini family, and demand that he come alone. But attached to those 4 words was a photograph, and the object in that photograph was something no one could have forged. It showed a wristwatch with a square face, a leather strap cracked around the 3rd hole, and 2 initials with a year engraved on the back. It was his father's watch. It had disappeared from the scene on that December night in 2018, and no one had found it in 8 years. The police had listed the motive in their report as robbery. Raphael had never believed that because a robber wouldn't take one particular object and leave the wallet behind. He pushed open the side door and stepped inside. The warehouse lights came on almost at the same moment, and 10 men were waiting in the sudden brightness. 9 stood in a wide arc, while the 10th stood at the center, empty-handed, his coat buttoned all the way up, his hair as neatly arranged as it was every Monday morning. Good morning, sir, Gideon Prosser said. Raphael showed no surprise. He looked across the other 9 men and recognized 4 of them, and all 4 belonged to the family. 2 had served his father since before Raphael was born. Not one of them looked him directly in the eye. Where is the watch? Raphael asked. Gideon reached into his coat pocket and placed it on a shipping crate positioned in the middle of the warehouse. The watch lay there with its square face and cracked leather strap. Raphael didn't approach it. He remained where he was. You showed it to me to get me inside, he said. Now I'm here. Speak. You don't want to sit down? Speak. Gideon nodded slowly, as though he respected that. I've kept the books for this family for 12 years, he said. Do you know how long 12 years feels when they're spent sitting in a room without windows? For 12 years, I've known exactly where every dollar entered and left this house, who was taking from whom, which money was clean and which wasn't. And during those 12 years, I was never once permitted to sit at the desk on the 2nd floor. I'm asking you only one question, Raphael said. Who killed my father? Gideon Prosser looked at him. Then he answered with perfect calm, using the same voice he had always used when reporting 3 matters every Monday morning. I did. No sound moved through the 4,000-square-meter warehouse. I didn't pull the trigger, he continued. I never do that sort of thing. You know me. I only provided the timing. I told them which route the old man would take that night, which car would travel ahead of him, and which would follow, and that he would be coming home 40 minutes earlier than usual. That was all. 4 telephone calls, less than 6 minutes altogether. Raphael didn't move. Why? Because the old man was about to find out. Gideon shrugged. I joined this family 12 years ago, in 2014. For 4 years, I took a little at a time, never more than $5,000 in a single transaction, spread across dozens of expense categories, and no one noticed. Then, in the autumn of 2018, the old man began asking questions. He didn't suspect me. He was only making casual inquiries about a few accident compensation payments connected to the cold storage warehouses. But I knew he would keep asking, because he was the sort of man who always kept asking. He paused. Your father was a decent man. That was his only problem. Raphael Orsini stood there, unable to speak. 8 years. For 8 years, he had risen at 6 o'clock every morning and opened the door where 12 men waited outside. For 8 years, he hadn't returned to the lecture hall, hadn't touched the stethoscope in the drawer, and hadn't once been allowed to become the man he had intended to be. For 8 years, He had signed things he hadn't wanted to sign and made decisions he hadn't wanted to make. And he had endured all of it, with one thought holding him upright, that someday he would discover the name, and that name had sat 2 floors below his office. Every Monday morning at 7:15, it knocked on his door and carried in 2 cups of coffee. 12 years, Raphael said. His voice was hoarse. Every Monday morning. I made good coffee. You sat inside my house for 12 years. I sat inside a windowless room in the basement of your house for 12 years, Gideon corrected him. That's different. Raphael raised his hand, and his right thumb rhythmically struck the signet ring on his pinky finger. 2 very soft sounds in the empty warehouse. The 4 family men standing in the line heard them, and one of them stepped back half a pace. What are you going to do to me? Raphael asked. Nothing at all, Gideon said. I don't need you dead. Dead men can't sign documents, and I have several things I need you to sign. He lifted a worn leather document case from behind the crate and set it down beside the watch. Besides, I'm still waiting. Waiting for what? And at that exact moment, the warehouse's side door opened. Gideon Prosser smiled because the person who stepped inside was the person he had been waiting for from the very beginning. Maren Doyle entered Warehouse 7 with Sabine walking on her left and Freddie Kovac on her right, and none of the 3 women carried anything in their hands. Raphael turned around, and for 1 second he couldn't speak. Get out. No, Maren. I said no. She stopped in the middle of the warehouse, about 5 paces from him, and looked across the 9 men arranged in a wide arc. She recognized 4 of them. Bertoli, who stood at the left corner outside the office every morning, and always asked for his coffee without sugar. Kowal, who had twin daughters, and had shown their photograph to everyone in the kitchen the year before. Mancuso and Red, the 2 men whose rooms she had cleaned in the guest quarters for 2 years, changing their towels, collecting their clothes, even knowing which kind of soap they used. All 4 men were staring at the floor. Miss Doyle, Gideon Prosser said, his voice as pleasant as ever. I've been waiting quite a while for you. You were waiting for me? From the beginning. He picked up the worn leather document case, opened it, and placed 2 sheets of paper on the shipping crate, turning them so she could read them. Go ahead. You may read them aloud if you like. Maren stepped forward. The first page was a workers' compensation claim, a printed form completed by hand. The employee's name on the first line was Thomas Doyle. The location of the accident was Cold Storage Warehouse 4 on the South Branch riverfront. The date was January 17th, 2018. In the lower right corner was a red ink stamp. The letters faded but still legible. Denied. The second document was a 2-page internal review listing claims that needed to be reopened. At the bottom of the second page was a signature. Raphael Orsini, dated 2 years earlier. You came here intending to save the man who has known about this for 2 years, Gideon said. The man who paid you twice what anyone else in this city would pay so that you would never ask a single question. What did you think you were in that house, Miss Doyle? A lover or an expense? Maren didn't take her eyes from the page. Is he telling the truth? She asked. She didn't turn around. Yes, Raphael answered immediately, without a second of hesitation. And that was the only thing that saved him that night. I signed that review. 2 years ago, I discovered irregularities in the compensation claims from the cold storage facilities, and I ordered every case reopened. Then I gave the investigation to him. He paused. I entrusted the correction to the very man who had caused the wrongdoing, and I never checked again. For 2 years. Did you know my father's name was among them? Yes. Since when? Since before you came to work in my house. Maren closed her eyes. I was going to tell you the night you left. You had 2 years to tell me. No one in the warehouse spoke. Gideon Prosser stood there and allowed the silence to stretch, because this was precisely what he had spent 3 weeks preparing, and he knew it was doing exactly what he intended. Then Maren reached out and picked up the document case. She didn't reread the first 2 pages. She turned to the third, then the fourth. Then she began turning them faster, continuing until she reached the final page, and when she looked up, something in her face had changed. This isn't one claim, she said. Gideon didn't answer. There are 41. She turned the stack around. 41 names, from 2014 through last year. Every one of them worked in the cold storage facilities. Every claim was denied, and every one of them passed across the desk of the same man. She began to read. She read slowly and clearly, one name at a time. When she reached the 9th name, one man in the ark raised his head. When she reached the 17th, a second man looked up. Marin stopped and stared directly at the man standing at the far left end of the line. Bertoli. Your father. Warehouse 4. 2016. How much did your family receive? Bertoli didn't answer. Not a single dollar, Marin said. Neither did mine. The man who paid your wages this morning is the same man who took that money from you. She continued reading. The 23rd name was Kowal. The 31st was Red. No one in the warehouse said a word, and no one needed to, because what was happening there was no longer about loyalty or betrayal. It was about 41 families whose pockets had been emptied inside the very house whose doors they stood guard over. Bertoli lowered his weapon first, then Kowal, then, one by one, the others followed without anyone giving an order. Gideon Prosser turned and started toward the side door. He made it 4 steps. Bertoli and Kowal blocked him, one on either side, and the whole thing took less than 5 seconds. He didn't shout. He only stood there with both arms restrained, looking at Raphael Orsini with the expression of a man who knew he had just lost a game he had believed was already won. Raphael moved toward him. He took 1 step, then a second, and the expression on his face was something Marin had never seen on the face of another human being. She placed one hand on his arm. Both of us once had hands trained to save people, she said. The same Winter took that from you, and took it from me. Don't let him take away the reason you chose that profession in the first place. Raphael stood perfectly still, for a very long time. Then he stepped back, turned to Bertoli, and spoke in the voice of a man who had just set down something unbearably heavy. Turn him over to the authorities. All 41 files go with him. Morning had broken by the time they walked out of Warehouse 7. The square-faced watch was still lying on the shipping crate, and Raphael was the one who went back to retrieve it. On the drive home, Marin didn't sit beside him. Marin sat in the back seat close to the door on the right, while Raphael sat on the left with exactly one empty space between them that neither of them crossed. Sabine drove. Freddie sat in the front passenger seat and didn't turn around once. For 20 minutes, no one said a word. Then Marin spoke, her voice ordinary, no louder than the sound of the engine. I didn't leave you because you're a mob boss. Raphael turned toward her. I could have stayed through that, she said. I thought about it. I thought about it for 3 weeks, and I came back, and I sat in your office every morning learning how to read payroll records. I could stay, knowing who you are. She looked straight ahead, but you let me serve in the house that kept my father's file. For 2 years, I scrubbed the floors of that house, washed your shirts, and made coffee for the men who waited outside your office. And every month, you paid me twice the usual wage in this city so I would never ask a single question. Marin, give me time. She said those words and nothing more. Not today. The car stopped at the corner in Rogers Park. She opened the door, stepped out, and didn't look back. For the next 3 weeks, Raphael Orsini didn't send her a single message. He didn't call. He didn't ask Sabine to speak for him, didn't ask Freddie to carry a message, and didn't send anyone to park outside her building. During those 3 weeks, he did 3 things. First, he opened the old records safe in the room at the end of the basement corridor. It was the safe his grandfather had installed in the house in 1972, and through 3 generations of the Orsini family, not one head of the family had ever opened it for another person to see. He sat alone in that windowless room for 8 consecutive days, more than 10 hours each day. Second, he made a list, 41 names, each with an address, the amount of money that should have been paid, and the number of years that had passed since each claim was stamped denied. 12 families had moved out of state. 3 families had no one left. The third thing was the hardest. On a Thursday evening, Raphael Orsini knocked on the door of the apartment in Rogers Park. Marin opened it and said nothing. He didn't ask permission to enter. He simply stood at the threshold, placed a stack of papers on the dining table, pushed against the wall, the table she used as a study desk, and stepped back. I'm not asking you to forgive me, he said. I don't have the right to ask for that, and I know I don't. I'm asking you to let me give it back. Marin looked at the papers. 41 names. Every claim reopened from the beginning, through the proper process, with outside attorneys and outside auditors. I'm not hiding a single number. He paused. Under your name, not mine. Marin looked up. Why under my name? Because under my name, it would be charity from the Orsini family. Under yours, it is 41 families reclaiming what belongs to them. He looked at her. And because your father is on the first line. Marin opened the stack. On the first page, on the first line, was the name Thomas Doyle, and beside it was a number. And beside that number was the date, January 17th, 2018. She looked at it for a long time. Then she closed the papers and rested one hand on top of them. I'll accept. Raphael breathed out, and it was the first time in 3 weeks he had been able to breathe out fully. But I have a fourth condition. Tell me. Of the first 3 conditions, you kept 2. She stood. You kept the first because whenever I asked, you answered. You kept the third because you truly taught me. You broke the second, and you broke it on the very day you promised it. So I won't give you the second condition again. There is no point. People don't keep their word through promises. Then how do they keep it? Through where someone is allowed to sit. Marin looked directly at him. I want to be in the room when you work. Every room. Not the chair in the corner of your desk where I sat learning to read payroll records. All of them. Even the rooms where you don't want me sitting. Even the meetings where you will find 10 perfectly reasonable reasons to tell me to stay home. Raphael Orsini didn't answer immediately. He stood there, and Marin could see him considering it, and she could also see that he wanted to say no. Do you understand what you're asking for? I do. You'll see things you won't be able to forget afterward. I've already seen them, she said. That morning in Warehouse 7, I saw your face when you walked toward him, and I'm still standing here. Raphael looked at her for another moment. All right, he said. 3 days later, she understood why he had hesitated. Because the first room he had to lead her into was a closed restaurant in Bridgeport. The restaurant was in Bridgeport, with a sign on the door saying it was closed for the day. And inside there was only one long table set in the middle of the dining room. Before they entered, Raphael showed Marin where to sit, in the chair to his left, and gave her exactly 3 instructions. Don't stand up. Don't pour water for anyone. If someone asks you a question, don't answer until he answers first. She sat in the place he had shown her and rested both hands on the table. The Halloran family arrived at 1 o'clock. Cormac Halloran was 61 years old, with short silver hair, and he entered first with 3 men following behind him. They sat on the opposite side of the table, and Marin watched the transformation take place. It began before the door even opened, from the moment the sound of a car reached them from the courtyard. Raphael's voice dropped by 2 tones, and remained there. His eyes went dark, not closed, but extinguished, like a room after the electricity had been cut, and all that remained behind them was something calculating. He sat differently. He placed his hands differently. He didn't make a single movement without a reason. The man who had sat at the kitchen table at 2 o'clock in the morning and told her to read while he sat beside her was no longer in the room. Orsini. Halloran. I hear you've been cleaning house. An internal matter. There are no internal matters in this business, and you know it. You lost your chief accountant, and the whole city heard the sound of it. Halloran lifted his glass of wine and let his gaze move toward Marin, slowly, from head to toe, before turning back. You brought a servant girl to the business table, Orsini? Raphael didn't raise his voice. He didn't strike the table, stand up, or change his posture. He simply set down his glass very softly and spoke in the voice that had dropped by 2 tones from the beginning. What did you just call my fiancé? No one at that dining table moved a hand. The 3 men seated beside Halloran didn't stir. The 2 Orsini men standing by the door didn't move either. Nothing happened, and it was precisely because nothing happened that Marin understood what was happening. The entire table was waiting to hear what Cormac Halloran would say next. Halloran took a sip of wine. Then he set down his glass. I didn't know, he said. Congratulations. Thank you. May we discuss Dock 9 now? What followed was 40 minutes of discussion about Dock 9. Permits, 2 roads, and 3 contractors. And Marin sat silently and listened from beginning to end. She understood about half of it. The half she understood came from the 3 weeks she had spent sitting in the chair at the corner of Raphael's desk. A little before 2 o'clock, they stood. Halloran shook Raphael's hand, nodded to Marin, and left. Sabine drove them home, and this time Marin sat beside Raphael. He won't stop at Dock 9, she said. No, he'll demand more. 6 months from now. Marin looked out the car window for a while. Then she asked the question she had been meaning to ask since they walked out of the restaurant. What will you do if he pushes all the way? Raphael didn't answer immediately. Tell me the truth, she said. You promised me the first condition. When I ask, you answer, and you answer honestly. I'll do what I've done before. He said it while looking straight ahead. I'm not proud of it. I won't tell you what happened or when. But I won't lie to you anymore about who I am. Marin sat in silence for a long time. She wasn't shocked. That was what frightened her, that she had heard those words and hadn't been shocked. Do you hate it? Yes. How much? Enough that I haven't slept through an entire night in 8 years, Raphael said. Enough that I keep a stethoscope in a drawer, and I can't bring myself to throw it away, but I can't bring myself to open the drawer either. The car continued for some distance. Then Marin said the words she would always remember speaking with remarkable calm, far more calm than she had expected. Then we change this business. Raphael turned to look at her. Not because I'm afraid, she said. I stopped being afraid the day we were in Warehouse 7. It's for another reason. What reason? Because I don't want our child to grow up and have to ask their father the same question I just asked you in this car today. Raphael Orsini couldn't speak. He remained silent for the rest of the drive, and when the car reached the gates, he still hadn't said a word. Sabine looked at the two of them in the rearview mirror, and she said nothing either. That Sunday, the entire family sat down at the dining table, and in the middle of the second course, Nonna Rosalba set down her fork and never picked it up again. There were 19 people at the Orsini family's Sunday dinner table. Marin sat to Raphael's left, and for the first 40 minutes, no one asked her anything beyond a few polite questions. In the middle of the second course, a distant uncle, seated across from her, put down his fork and spoke more loudly than necessary. Miss Doyle, may I ask you something? Yes, sir. What did you do before you came into this house? The table grew a little quieter. Raphael was about to speak, but Marin placed her hand on his wrist beneath the table, and he stopped. Before I came here, I cleaned rooms at a hotel on Ohio Street, she said, for 3 years. Before that, I washed dishes at a restaurant in Pilsen for 2 years, on the night shift. And before that, I was a second-year nursing student. Then you left school? Yes. Why? Because there was a 5-year-old child who needed someone to sign the papers, and there was no one else left to sign them. She said it in an ordinary voice, neither lowering it nor placing emphasis on any word, and she didn't add a single sentence of apology for any of the 3 jobs she had just named. The uncle picked up his fork. He didn't ask another question, and at that exact moment, at the head of the table, Nonna Rosalba stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. She had been telling the person seated on her right something in Italian, and she simply stopped without finishing. Her right hand, resting on her napkin, began to tremble. Her forehead was damp. She turned toward Sabine and called her by another name, the name of a woman who wasn't in the room. An aunt sitting nearby laughed lightly. Nana is tired. Let her go upstairs and rest. 2 people stood and began moving around the table to help her. Marin rose before either of them reached her. Don't help her stand. Everyone at the table turned to look at her. She had already moved past 3 chairs and reached the old woman's side, and she lowered herself onto one knee so that her face was level with Nonna Rosalba's. Mrs. Orsini, can you look at me? The old woman looked toward her, but her eyes couldn't settle on anything. What time did you eat breakfast today? The old woman didn't answer. Marin took her wrist, placed 2 fingers over her pulse, and counted silently for about 15 seconds. Then she looked up and spoke in a voice no one in that house had heard her use during the 2 years she had lived there. There is orange juice in the refrigerator, the bottle in the door, on the middle shelf. Someone bring it now, the whole bottle, and don't dilute it. One of the daughters-in-law ran toward the kitchen. Sabine, call an ambulance. Tell them she is an 82-year-old woman with diabetes, confusion, and signs of low blood sugar. Sabine already had her telephone in her hand. And no one gives her anything else to drink. No wine, no coffee, no medicine. No one helps her stand. The uncle who had questioned Marin earlier started to say something. Marin didn't turn around. Please sit down. He sat. The bottle of orange juice arrived. Marin helped the old woman take small sips, one hand supporting her back, and spoke to her the entire time in a perfectly ordinary voice, asking about the Italian book she had been reading, asking whether she had slept well the previous Friday. 3 minutes later, Nonna Rosalba turned to her right, looked directly at Sabine, and called her by the correct name. The entire dining table fell silent. The old woman sat a little straighter. Her voice was still weak, but everyone in the room heard every word. For 6 months, every step from my bed to the door has been pure agony, she said. I hid it from all of you. Not because I was ashamed, because I couldn't bear the way you would look at me afterward, the way you would look at an old woman who was about to die. The only person who knew was this girl. She came to my room 2 nights a week, Tuesday and Friday, after finishing her own work. She never took a single cent from me. She never said a word to anyone, not even to my grandson. She turned toward Raphael. You asked whether I accepted her. Look around this table. Her gaze moved across all 19 people. In a house full of men carrying guns, the person who just saved your grandmother's life is the woman who scrubbed your floors. The ambulance arrived 12 minutes later. The paramedics examined her, took her measurements, and said she would be all right, that she was fortunate someone had acted quickly. Nana Rosalba absolutely refused to get into the ambulance, and in the end, they allowed her to remain at home on the condition that a nurse begin coming to the house the following day. When everything had settled, she told Marin to take her down to the kitchen. At that hour, the main kitchen held only the 2 of them, and a single light above the sink. The old woman removed the ring from her left hand. It was gold, plain, worn smooth along the inside, and it came off with difficulty because it hadn't left that finger once in 58 years. She placed it in Marin's palm. Mrs. Orsini. It isn't beautiful, the old woman said. I know. There are no stones, no engraving, and one side has been worn almost flat, but it never left my hand through 3 moves, 2 wars, and the burial of 1 husband. She closed Marin's fingers around it. My boy bought your ring 5 weeks ago. He keeps it hidden in the 3rd drawer on the right. I'm only warning you now, so you won't cry too much when he asks you later. 10 minutes afterward, on the back porch, Raphael Orsini discovered that his plan had been completely ruined. He had intended to do it the following week, somewhere else, with a speech he had already prepared. He stood there watching Marin laugh and understood that his grandmother had destroyed every part of it. And then he knelt on the cold brick floor of that porch. Neither of them could later remember exactly what he said. They only remembered that he said it very badly. Inside the house, beyond the glass doors, 19 people applauded, and Sabine Orsini shouted that she had won the bet and everyone else owed her money. 11 days later, 2 people knocked on the door of Marin's office, and what they placed on her desk wasn't an offer. It was a document with her name written on the line marked Director. The woman who entered introduced herself as Special Agent Naomi Fielder, assigned to financial crimes, and the man accompanying her didn't say a single word during the 40 minutes that followed. Fielder was about 45 years old, her hair tied neatly back, and she wasted no time on pleasantries. She placed a document on the desk. Read it. It was a business registration form. The company was called Lakeshore Meridian Holdings. It had been established in April of the previous year. On the line, naming the legal representative, under the title of director, was Marin Doyle's name, along with her social security number and the address of her apartment in Rogers Park. Marin looked at the company name and remembered immediately. A Friday afternoon, the chair at the corner of the desk, the list of 19 subsidiary entities, spread across 2 sheets of paper, and her pencil stopping at the 14th line. The column beside it had been blank. No one knew who was in charge. I'll ask Gideon. I've never seen this document before, she said. I know. I've never signed anything. I know that too, Fielder said. The signature on it isn't yours. We've compared them. Gideon Prosser took your information from the Orsini household's personnel records and created this company 2 months ago. During those 15 months, $3,800,000 passed through its accounts. She sat down. The problem is that according to federal records, you are the director of a money laundering company. Marin said nothing. You can prove that you didn't know, Fielder continued. We believe you didn't know, but proving it in court will take 2 years and cost more money than you earn in 10. During those 2 years, you won't be permitted to leave the state. You won't be allowed to practice in healthcare in any capacity, and your name will appear in the public record. She pushed a second document across the desk, which is why I've come to make you an offer. Full immunity from every charge, with the case permanently closed. A new identity. Another city. And on the final line was the thing Marin had to read twice before she could believe it. Under that new identity, her educational record would be reconstructed in full. Her degree, her professional license, everything. You understand what that means, Fielder said. It means that next Monday morning, you wake up in another city and you are already a nurse, Not almost one. You already are one. Marin didn't answer. I've read your file, Fielder said, and her voice softened slightly, which somehow made it worse. For 7 years, you earned back every credit one at a time at a community college, taking evening classes and weekend classes, paying out of your own pocket. For 7 years, you studied at someone else's kitchen table at 2 o'clock in the morning. You are missing only one clinical placement, and you can't find a way to make the hours work. Is that right? Yes. I can erase those 7 years. All you have to do is sign your name once. Marin sat there for a long time. She thought of a 12-year-old boy who loved chess and criticized the way she tied her hair. And she thought about how, in another city, he would have another name, and he would ask why. She thought about 7 years spent at kitchen tables. She picked up the pen. She held it in her hand for about 10 seconds. Then she put it down. I'm not signing this, she said. But I have something you need more. Fielder looked up. 41 workers' compensation claims, buried between 2014 and last year, every one of them connected to the cold storage facilities on the South Branch riverfront. They contain the signature of the person who approved each denial. They contain the corresponding accounting entries. They contain the names of 41 workers' families and the amounts they should have received. She looked directly into the eyes of the woman across from her. You want a clean financial case with real victims, real numbers, and living people who can testify in court instead of a stack of bank transfer records? There it is. My father is on the first line. You're protecting him. No, Marin said. I'm reclaiming what belonged to my father. It just happens not to be where you thought it was. Fielder studied her for a moment. Where are those 41 files? Inside the old records safe in the Orsini house. And you think he'll open that safe for me? The second meeting took place 3 days later at the mansion, and Sabine Orsini objected fiercely from the very first word. No, Sabine. No. Do you know what that safe is? Grandfather installed it in this house in 1972. 3 generations of this family have died because of the records inside it. If you open it to the federal government, you won't be giving them only 41 files. You'll be giving them 30 years. I know. Then you've lost your mind. Raphael Orsini sat at the head of the table. He paused, reflexively tapping his pinky ring twice in that familiar, quiet habit before removing it entirely. Then he did something Marin had never seen him do. He removed the ring from his finger and placed it on the table. My father kept those records, he said. My father died because of those records. I won't keep them anymore. No one in the room spoke. Naomi Fielder gathered the documents into her case. She stood, walked toward the door, then stopped and turned to Marin. Is that man worth so much? No, Marin said. I am the one who decides what I am worth, and I am not that cheap. That night, Raphael found her at the kitchen table with her books open in front of her as they were every night, and he said only one thing. 2 months. I can't wait any longer. The wedding took place on a Saturday morning in early autumn, and the person commanding the entire affair was an 82-year-old woman seated in an armchair in the middle of the entrance hall, with her private nurse standing behind her. Nonna Rosalba gave orders in 3 languages, Italian to the family, English to the caterers, and a third language no one could identify, though everyone who heard it understood that they needed to do exactly what she wanted immediately. She made them rearrange the flowers 3 times. She made them replace the tablecloths twice. By the second day, her private nurse had stopped advising her to rest. In the kitchen, Freddie Kovac tasted the first dish, set down the spoon, and stood facing the wall for a while. And when someone asked what was wrong, she said it was the onions. Micah was 13 years old, had been out of the hospital for 4 months, and now lived with his sister in their new apartment. That morning, he brought out the chessboard and insisted that Raphael play 1 game with him before the ceremony, and Raphael agreed because he thought it would take 10 minutes. The game lasted 22 minutes, and Raphael Orsini lost completely. You brought your queen out too early, Micah said, putting the pieces away with the expression of someone who had finished a necessary task. You and my sister are exactly alike. You're both impatient. Then Micah was the one who took his sister by the hand and walked her down the aisle. He was wearing the first suit of his life, and he was so nervous that he walked far ahead of the music, and Marin had to pull him back halfway down, and the entire church laughed. Marin's vow was very brief. I spent 7 years keeping someone else alive. I don't know how to promise anything greater than that, so that is exactly what I promise you. Raphael's vow was even shorter. I walked past that kitchen for 107 nights without daring to go inside. From today on, I won't walk past it anymore. During the reception, Nana Rosalba raised her glass, and the entire room fell silent because she had lifted one hand. To cold hands, she said. She came into this house to scrub the floors. Then she cleared away the shadows. 3 generations of Orsinis were too afraid to face. 1 year later, Warehouse 7 on the South Branch riverfront had become a cold storage distribution center, serving 4 community hospitals and 2 food banks on the south side of Chicago, and Orsini Freight did only one thing now: leasing warehouse space and transporting goods. 29 of the 41 families had received their compensation, and the name Thomas Doyle appeared on the first line of that list. Gideon Prosser was sentenced for financial fraud and complicity, a sentence far longer than anything Raphael Orsini could have done to him with his own hands inside that warehouse. And Marin Doyle completed her final clinical placement and passed her licensing examination at the age of 29, after 7 years of delay, and she accepted the night shift at a free clinic located beside Warehouse 7. One spring night, at 2 o'clock in the morning, the kitchen light was still on. Marin sat at the table in the clothes she had worn home from work, a patient file open in front of her, and when she looked up, she saw Raphael standing in the doorway. He stepped inside, pulled out the chair across from her, sat down, and placed on the table the old stethoscope that had remained inside a drawer for 8 years. "I can't use it anymore." "You should." Marin picked it up. Then she asked him the question she had been asking since that first night in the secondary kitchen, the question he had never answered. Why 107? Which night was the first? Raphael was silent for a moment. "That night, I came home at 2 o'clock in the morning," he said. "I used the back stairs because I didn't want anyone to know I had returned. I stood in the darkness at the bottom of the stairs, and I saw you." "What did you see me doing?" "You were carrying a tray up to the 3rd floor. There was medicine on it, bandages, and a glass of water. You walked very softly because you were afraid of waking anyone. You went all the way down the west corridor and knocked 3 times on the final door." He looked at her. "No one had assigned that work to you. No one paid you to do it. No one in the house knew, not even me, until that night." Marin said nothing. "I stood there and understood something," Raphael said. "That house held 12 men carrying guns. It had lawyers. It had accountants. It had my grandmother, whose name made this entire city lower its voice. And the only person still doing something kind when no one was watching was you." He placed one hand on the table. "That was night number 1. From that night forward, I counted. And the night I knocked on your door was night number 107. Then what night is tonight?" "Night number 108, he said. "It is still night number 108, because since that night, I haven't walked past you one more time. There are things in this life people believe no one ever sees. A tray of medicine carried to the 3rd floor in the middle of the night. A bandage changed for someone who doesn't want anyone to know she is weak. A kitchen table lit for 7 years while a woman bends over a stack of books, and no one asks why. A person's dignity has never rested in the work they happen to be doing, but in the way they treat others when absolutely no one is there to witness it. And the strange thing is that someone always sees, only much later than we imagine. Deferred dreams are the same. They don't die. They simply lie there, waiting until we are brave enough to allow ourselves to return to them." And what Nana Rosalba said was truer than anything else. Between caring for everyone in the world and allowing someone else to care for us, there is a very great distance. A person truly grows up only on the day they learn to open the second door. If this story touched you, please press the like button, share it with someone you believe may need to hear it, and subscribe to our channel so we can listen together to more beautiful stories every day. How did Marin and Raphael's story make you feel, and what part of it will remain with you the longest? Please leave a comment below, because we sincerely hope to hear the feelings that come from deep within your heart. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in every day. Goodbye, and we look forward to seeing you again in the next video.